Yeah, thank you so much. Welcome to this episode of the True Patriot Podcast. Once again, we continue in the spirit of Ubuntu to try to pursue collective solidarities and even individual happiness for all the citizens of Zimbabwe and citizens of the world. But again, we attend to a critical issue, the issue of care workers who are moving from Zimbabwe to other destinations. Some are moving from rural areas to urban areas, and just also a general analysis of the economy of care work to say what is the situation like? Who is carrying the burden? Are they getting enough support? But are people still receiving enough care work? This is in the context where we realize that Zimbabwe is contributing a fair number of citizens who are joining the global chains of care work. So to help me discuss this particular issue, I am joined by two comrades, Comrade Margaret Mutsamvi, who is the Director of Economic Justice for Women Project. She'll share more about that. And also Comrade Francis Garkai, who is a trade unionist with a union representing care workers in the United Kingdom, among other workers. Welcome, comrades. Maybe Comrade Maggie, you can shoot first and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you, Comrade Obet, and thank you so much for having us and this critical discussion, very timely. My name is Margaret Mutsamvi. I'm the Director of Economic Justice for Women Project. It's a young women-focused non-profit organization that is focusing on building women's voice and agency around critical macroeconomic issues, particularly confronting issues, the neoliberal economic frameworks and how it affects women, and also particularly the burden of care.
Thanks, Comrade Maggie. Comrade Garga, you can quickly jump in.
Thanks a lot, Comrade Obit, and thanks for having me. So my name is Francis. I'm the Secretary of the Pan-African Workers Association, which is mainly known as Power here in the UK. We are mainly organizing migrant care workers who come to the UK to work in the social care sector, which this really phenomenon increased, I think, in 2021, thereabout, when the British government introduced a health and care visa, which allowed care workers to migrate from different countries to come and work in the social care industry in the UK. So we started off as we really started off as a movement on WhatsApp just to provide peer support, because people were coming to the UK and finding themselves in very difficult circumstances, which I imagine we'll be going into more detail today. And for most people, they didn't get any support because they were not in any trade union. So we just been encouraging people to join trade unions here in Britain, so that in the event of something happening, they would be able to get support, as well as for them to be able to assert their rights, because most people, when they were coming, they either weren't too sure of their employment rights here in the UK, or they would have been told something else. So one of the reasons we were established was to actually help people understand their rights better, and for them to be respected in workplaces. That's more a bit about what I do.
Thank you so much. Now, quickly to Comrade Margaret, let's begin with you. What is driving people to leave their homes from Zimbabwe and go maybe to seek opportunities for care work in the United Kingdom, among other destinations? And what is the general state of care work, the economy of care work in Zimbabwe? If you could just give us.
Okay, thank you very much, Obed. Oh, okay, please.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I sound like I cut you.
No, it's fine. You can proceed.
Okay. So I'm so happy to be a part of this panel. When I was listening to Francis, I was hearing a very noble initiative, something that we think there's a lot of hope in terms of um, assisting with organizing of our care workers that are, migrating from varying corners of the world. So, but to come back to your question, to say what is driving, what are the push factors? According to our experiences and to our research, the 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 number one factor is survival. It's a livelihood issue. We know that we've had more than a 2 decade long economic crisis in Zimbabwe. Basically, since ESAP, like our economy hasn't really come hasn't really stabilized. So there's been an ongoing continued economic crisis where people are, there's higher levels of poverty, higher levels of unemployment. And then there are other factors really like the debt burden. Zimbabwe owes 21 billion and is cutting public spending. So such issues are really driving the inequality gap. It's really increasing inequality, and those that are really at the lowest levels of the hierarchy are suffering. They don't have options, they don't have basic social service delivery. And the even the issue of austerity measures, obit to say the government is trying to cut their wage bill. So you find that even the compensation for civil servants is not ideally equivalent to the input or their work, their contribution that they are making to the public. So you find that people are desperate. They are still stuck in these government institutions, in public health delivery system, trying to, because they are stranded, they are stuck, they don't have any other option. But so now when opportunities arise, or when any promise of an opportunity arise, people are utilizing it to flee the country. So that this is what we find problematic. Job security, there isn't job security. We know that when there's an economic crisis and there's very high levels of unemployment, it means that there are more people willing to be employed than the industries or the institutions that can actually absorb the workforce. So you find that even employers are now very abusive, they are manipulative towards their employees, and they are not paying what is actually due to them. So there's a lot of abuse in the workspace. There's no job security, casual part-time jobs, you are not assured of even pension and things like that. So better pay. So those are some of the key reasons that I can list: the need for better pay, job security, better opportunities, prospects, employment, survival, livelihood. So in terms of driving factors for me, that is that. And then also even in the families, the basic social needs in families that are lacking in families. When you can't even, when you are not sure where your next meal is coming from, you are looking at the next best person that can give the entire family hope. So you find that even people are moving from their other career lines, career opportunities, to train in first aid, or to skip the country and probably start training in care work. So those are, I think, the key drivers. But perhaps last but not least, there is also the issue of the political environment. So for us to talk about all these issues and to talk about chances of reforms and chances of change and chances of rebooting our industry, reactivating and the provision of social service delivery, we're also talking about the political question. So sometimes you find that people, when they have tried this, taking part in democratic processes, taking part in this, taking part in that, and there hasn't been much change in terms of the things that they want to see change, particularly just livelihood, just survival. So people have lost hope, and these are some of the key drivers that are really pushing people. People are desperate, they don't know where else to go, despite the love for their countries they've had to flee.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you for sharing it. It's very clear that the livelihoods are not there, the people are not employed, among other issues. But now, Comrade Garkai, someone was posting earlier on today on Twitter saying, in the past, the people in the diaspora used to have money. What happened to that money? Are the expectations being met? From what Margaret says, it seems like people are driven by big expectations and ambitions to get to the greener pastures. Are the pastures still green? What are the working conditions like in those destination countries where people are trying to offer their services to get a livelihood?
Yeah, I mean, thanks to Comrade Margaret for really going into detail in terms of the driving forces, the driving force there. The honest truth is, I think for most people, the expectations are not being met, and notwithstanding which profession actually. Although most people would say it is the care profession that's not meeting people's expectations, but I think for most people here in Britain, at least, wages have been stagnant since the 1980s. There seems to be government after government that's been really um, kind of chiseling down working conditions, and workers' conditions seem to be getting worse and worse every year. And I think the reason why they then tend to migrant workers is very simple. Contrary to popular belief that these things are set up as a way of providing us with opportunities, I think the reason why the visas are introduced in the first place is to make sure that the British government and many other Western countries can bring people on very cheap wages to start with in the worst conditions. So you find that, I mean, however much most people would be earning, maybe if you come in social care, will be earning just above minimum wage, and rentals are very high. The cost of reproducing your life in the UK is very high because you pay high rentals, you have to pay other bills, council tax, and the cost of living is very high. So in that case, if you find yourself saving £50, you will be very lucky. Most people, even in our discussion groups, are living from hand to mouth. And I think these expectations of the past, right, were also a result of failing to actually understand the global dynamics involved in the movement of labor from one country to the other, and also not actually reckoning with the mechanics of an equal exchange. And I mean, whilst in the past, obviously, this might have been a little attractive because you would have to send money back home and people could exchange that in Zim dollars and get millions of Zimbabwean dollars. This is no longer possible. So I think, yeah, I would say by and large the expectations are not being met, and I think the system is designed in that way. Really, migration is not supposed to be helping us in the sense that we hope that we can run away from our home countries. Maybe yes, you'll be able to get a salary every month, but most of it is just going to be taken away, paying your day-to-day living.
Okay, so indeed, people still got there with the hopes that were inspired from yesterday experiences where people would build houses the same month, the same year they would go to the UK, which is no longer the case. But back to you, Comrade Margaret, when we look at the care economy in Zimbabwe, we understand now we have maybe some of these people are parents to their own children, but they are forced to live to give care to other families, to the elderly and children elsewhere. Uh, what is the state of care work from your own rural areas, urban areas? Is the government assisting in any way to provide care? Do we have private players who are also coming in? What is the impact now when these maybe people who are supposed to also give care to their own families are leaving? What are some of the impacts that you are noticing?
Thank you very much, Obed, for that question. I also, just before jumping in, want to recognize the issues that Comrade Francis raised there, to acknowledge the past expectation. And I think this is the dream that people are still holding on to, what used to happen. So thank you for highlighting that, Comrade Francis. So Obed, to come back to your question, I think you asked me 3 questions there, if you notice, but I'll try to respond to all of them. I will allow me to categorize care into two forms. So we have the formal care service, right? This is our government hospitals, even our private hospitals, the formal institutionalized care institutions. And then we have what I will refer to as informal care services for the people that fail to get care in formal government institutions or private institutions. They resort to this, what I'm calling informal care, which is almost the one that is at a household or a family affair, like what is happening in the home or in the communities, care provided by communities and by homes. And definitely you are correct to say that the burden has really disproportionately fallen on the women. So I'll start with you said something about rural areas, and then you say something about urban areas as well. So if allow me please to continue to refer to the neoliberal economic economic frameworks, because I'm an economist and I'm working on issues to do with economic justice. You will notice that this continued economic crisis and the increasing debt burden, like Zimbabwe is owing around plus or minus 21 billion United States dollars, right? What happens when we borrow, either responsibly or unresponsibly either, is that now the government is receiving instructions from the IMF and from the World Bank to implement austerity measures so that they can cut back government expenditure at the expense. Now I want you really have to to follow now. This is at the expense of public services such as health. So I've started that far back because you will find that we are already in this conundrum as Zimbabweans, where the spending on health has been cut. When it has been cut, and it has also introduced a lot of players, because you also talked about issues of players. It has introduced a lot of actors in the health sector across board, education and I'll focus on the health sector. So we have a lot of private players in the health sector. And when we look at the struggles, when you look at an average Zimbabwean citizen is in survival mode. So what are the chances that they can afford basic primary health care before we even go to a private institution? For those that can even ferry themselves to a public hospital, they get there. Actually getting there is a problem because the infrastructure is not adequate in terms of even ambulances that can transport them to take them to the hospital. And then when they get there, probably they might not find what they need. If they need a radioactive scan, if they need anything, they are referred to private players. So this is how it has been playing out. And for those that are in rural areas, that are on the margins, that are on the lowest of the pyramids, even middle class, because middle class is our civil servants who are, not even getting adequate, then they cannot even afford it. So we find that an average Zimbabwean cannot afford basic care. I'm just speaking in terms of health because of this whole context that I've been trying to shed light on. So when people cannot get health services from government institutions, cannot afford health services from private institutions, then they resort to the home. Community, the care is now dependent on the community care. The community is now providing care, and the household is now providing care. And when we look at that level, it means that most people that are providing care, they are women. When children are not feeling well, when the husbands are not feeling well, when the elderly are not feeling well, those persons with disabilities, the primary healthcare providers, in highest percentage is women. So the burden has largely fallen on the communities in terms of providing care. And the burden has also fallen mostly on women, young and old. They are now responsible. They have taken the responsibility of government. In our spaces, we actually say the women are paying for the debt that was borrowed by someone else, used on something else. But now, because we cannot fund these services, it's the citizen that is paying. So this is how it is playing out. And most women are now responsible for subsidizing the government in terms of securing water at household level, securing health services, securing, and even what do you call it? Substituting the infrastructure that is supposed to be there. So this is how it plays out. They are also paying even in terms of when we look at the health budget allocation. Let me just also say on the health budget allocation, it is a reflection. You will see how care is being prioritized by our government institutions when they allocate, for instance, maybe 10.2% instead of the 15% set by the Abuja Declaration. So when we compromise institutions that are supposed to provide care, it means someone is paying for it. And definitely you are right to say it is the women that are taking on the burden. When we say education is expensive and then people have to do private lessons, we are now sitting down having to do all these things with our children that were never done before. Even paying in terms of death, a lot of women are losing their lives because the government failed to subsidize or to provide the gap that needed for these women to receive adequate care. When we look at the maternal death rate here in Zimbabwe, which is still at 363 per 100,000, that's a lot too many women to die giving birth in a country that really cares about its citizens, that cares about its women. So this is the status that is here at home. And because the formal care services are failing to absorb everyone, the poor, middle class, rural, indigenous communities, persons with disabilities, those that cannot afford to subsidize their own health systems, that cannot afford to pay for the health insurances, they are now being absorbed by the informal care system, which is where we find a lot of women being burdened, having to subsidize the government in terms of providing all these services that the government was supposed to provide in the first place. I hope that that came out clear a bit.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very clear, and really it's helpful, and I also learned a lot from that. And maybe Comrade Francis, you would want to come in to also just give us a general appreciation of the state of care work in the UK. Where are these people working who are coming from Zimbabwe? Are they going to be working for government? Are they working in the private sector? What is their relations with what is the attitude towards the migrant care worker from the general citizen from the UK? And maybe what are even the opportunities for you to go there? Maybe you are let's say you are an engineer, but the only job there is for care work. You decided to go through the care work route. What are the opportunities of finding your way back to being an engineer? Maybe if you would just give us our appreciation, an overview on that, so that at least our citizens can also see if there are opportunities there. Yeah. I can't. We can't hear you, Comrade Francis. We can't hear you. Nothing. We can't hear you. No, there's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing.
Maybe you can try to switch off video, perhaps, if it can help. I don't know.
Hello. Okay, so maybe you can try to re-end, to leave and re-end again, and then try to see if we can get an audio from your end, because we don't seem to be getting an audio at the moment. There's nothing. There's no audio. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no audio. There's no audio there.
And now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We got you.
Yeah, I'm so
You're
sorry.
better.
I don't know what's going on. Maybe I won't mute it again. I was saying before I answer your question, Obed, I was going to just quickly react to Margaret's points. I think, yeah, the question of debt is very important, not only for a country like Zimbabwe, but many other developing countries whose citizens are coming to the UK to work in the social care sector. You find that most of them are former colonies or they are hugely indebted. And I think debt has been used, at least in the imperialist system. Debt, the function of debt
So
is to
we were going to have the last part of the conversation to look at the dependence theory and how the economy is working globally.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
if you could.
yeah. Okay, fine. Sorry. Yeah. So, and I think your question of it was about where people are working in the care sector. So what you find is most care companies, in fact, the whole social care system in the UK was privatized in the 1980s. So it's provided by private entities, and there are big players, big companies that provide care, and there are very small companies that also provide care. It's usually divided into two types. So there's residential care where people live in a care home, and there are care workers who come to that care home to provide social care. And then there is what is referred to as domiciliary care, where care workers drive around communities providing social care. It might be, making a cup of tea for an elderly person in the morning, helping them with personal care and all the other things. And so this is where people also work. So I would say the huge influx, at least the people that we are in touch with that ended up in big problems, were coming to work for small companies. So what happened is some people left Zimbabwe maybe in the early 2000s and have naturalized citizens in the UK. And when the care crisis started to emerge in the UK, they just opened companies, and most local authorities were issuing out contracts. So if I was in my local authority, I can apply to provide social care. I can register a company, and then I can also apply to the Home Office to get a sponsorship license, which allows me to bring people from overseas to come and work for social care. And so such businesses were also have been quite prevalent, and they've been also not been notorious for providing the worst working conditions. That is to be expected because most of these businesses were undercapitalized, and there's not much money. So you just basically asking someone to come and work for you. You ask them to buy their own car to go around communities, maybe contribute towards their uniform, also maybe pay for their own training. So the privatization of care in the UK has caused a lot of problems in that sense because you're not guaranteed that you would get social care if you don't have money. Most people end up just when they retire, they have to sell their homes or use most of their savings to pay for this private care. There is obviously, if you are disabled, there is some sort of welfare system that might help towards your care, pay your for your care, but in most cases this is inadequate, and people often have to then resort to selling assets or asking for support from the government. So these are the main sort of employers. Now, as to regarding, so we have other people who were attracted by obviously using the care visa to come to the UK and hoping to branch into other sectors. This has been for some people very difficult. That when you come on that visa to then switch to other visas has been a very difficult thing for people. It's also now becoming increasingly difficult to switch to the care worker visa. Recently, the British government introduced some changes to the care visa, which will make it much harder to switch to the care visa. And they've also they seem to also have cancelled or rolling back on the care visa, such that going forward, actually, no new people are going to be hired from overseas under this health and care visa. I know some people, some scientists or people with master's degrees or PhDs who came to the UK under the care visa with the hope of branching to other sectors, and until now they have not managed, maybe 5 years ago. So it's very difficult to then shift to other sectors once you come on a care visa. So that's one thing that people often don't you know take into account, or if you're dealing with someone, they don't tell you that it might be a little bit difficult once you are there to switch. The information that's often shared is like, don't worry about it. As soon as you go to the UK, you can do whatever job you need, and you pursue whatever profession. That is not very true. That is not necessarily true because the visa system is very complicated.
Okay, great. So,
Wow.
maybe while you are still there, Comrade Francis, and I think this is very educative with regards to the visa system and also the state of care work. But we are looking at the attitude or towards migrant workers. That side has also changed. But what we are realizing is we seem to be like remaining at the periphery, continuing supplying whatever is needed by the sender, in this case, the UK. If they need care workers, we supply. If they need raw materials, we have to supply. Uh, from where you sit, what do you think are some, maybe beginning with the historical context which you wanted to come to, and also the current structures which are sustaining this world system where there is this one directional flow of what is important? There is only one sender which defines what is needed. And then maybe office you can go to the other issues that you wanted to speak to before I disrupted you. Comrade Francis.
Oh yes, sorry, Obet, I was now answering my own questions earlier on. Yeah, you also asked me about the attitude towards migrant care workers. Yes, I do that a lot. This is why I didn't go to school very much. I used to answer my own questions, which is a problem. Yeah, well, on the attitude, towards migrant social care workers, I would say I'd say for most people that are being provided care for, they would be working class, in Britain, and and they appreciate what people from overseas are doing for them. And to be honest, this is the general overview that I see. They are praised often. I've been in touch with people British families that say, "Oh, my father was terminally ill, and he received the best care from a Zimbabwean carer, or from a Nigerian carer, or from any other national carer." So the general attitude amongst the working class is that they appreciate the people who come to work in the social care sector, but that should be, understood alongside the general sentiment of the ruling class in Britain, which tries to use migration and racism as a way of dividing the working class. So we see, in news article after news article on Sky, on BBC about Britain, being taken over by migrants, and that these people are coming in droves. Often this is in reference to people who are coming on the small boats. There's often no recognition of the people who are coming through the legal channels, and most who actually are the majority of people coming to the UK, because they'll be getting sponsored roles. So the general attitude, I would say, to some in a succinct form, is that the government pretends as if there is not much value coming from migrant carers and migrant workers in general. Yet in every sector of society, if you go to a hotel these days in the UK, almost all the staff that you see is migrant. If you go to the service sector in restaurants, it might not necessarily be migrants from Africa, but migrants from other countries in Europe, from Eastern Europe and all these other places. So this is what is there, it's used against us. So this is what, like, one of the reasons why power was actually formed was to actually say, look, we need to be in an alliance with our working class comrades in Britain, who are being screwed by the same system, which makes it appear in news article after news article. Just recently, they said Britain is going to become an island of strangers. This is to reference that, oh, there's now these funny, these different looking people who are coming, to the UK, so they're just going to make us appear strangers. Yet we are doing all the important work of looking for the most vulnerable people in society. And I think if I was to just briefly start jumping into the historical context, the historical context obviously is colonialism and imperialism. Uh, Margaret refers to this as neoliberal, and slightly disagree that, yeah, well, there's people, neoliberal is kind of a very good word to use to describe good old imperialism and colonialism. But yeah, we can have that debate another day. But it's just really these structures, right, that make it impossible for countries in the global south to develop. And notwithstanding, no matter which leader you put, even if you were to go and put Karl Marx to lead an African country, they would still face the same problems of unequal exchange that you were talking about, and of us continuing to provide low value activities. So, for example, if you think of the dynamics now, it's actually a little bit disturbing. During the colonial era, some of these people who are now in their old age, right? Maybe some of them were involved in colonial conquest projects as army officers in Kenya or in other places. Now they are much older, you see, and some of their attitudes, the ones that are being cared for. I was talking to a comrade the other day, someone was receiving care, shouted at them racial insults. A black person, go back to Africa. What are you doing here? Don't give me medication. I want to be taken care of by a white person. But yeah, it's those things that, who is taking care of our grandmothers, of our children, when they've left their home countries to come and support here. And I can tell you for a fact, and most people, even when we talk with other trade unions in Britain, they know that the care system wouldn't tick for a day, just one day, if all the migrant care workers were to leave it. So it's a crisis, and I think we need to kind of sort of understand the dynamics at play here, which are both local and global, and not necessarily like confined to one government that's not necessarily doing the right technical things, but it's a system that makes it very difficult to to avoid such problems.
Thank you so much, comrade. Yeah, indeed, we're still victims of the colonial system, and we remain global south. Most of our small republics remain just clients in the global market, supplying what is needed at 10 point. But now, comrade Maggie, I just want to take you into uh, the issue. Let's revisit in detail the issue of patriarch. I think uh, the first thing to be colonized under the sun, I think, is the woman who was first colonized. And today, yeah, I think that way colonialism began, colonizing the woman. And now today we are discussing the issue of care work and the burden on women. But looking at the Zimbabwean context, if indeed we are going to lessen the burden on women, not only with the care work, but just looking at how the structures of patriarchy how patriarchy is being sustained in Zimbabwe. Uh, what do you think we can immediately do as society? We have seen the laws being passed, but still things are not changing. How do we ensure that at least there's some progress of defeating this hierarchy of patriarchy? While least we are focusing on other hierarchies, the state and capitalism, but how do we deal with this one, beginning with the issue of care work, among other contradictions in our society?
Yeah, that's an entire dissertation topic there, Comrade Obit. Before that, I love bouncing back energy and bouncing back ideas, and I wanted to recognize what Francis said about neoliberalism, that it could be colonialism, it could be imperialism. I would agree and say it could be a compounding issue of all these isms, and when we are looking at patriarchy, we are actually looking at all these isms, capitalism, because they were all created by the same face, the same people, the same institutions, Western at the time. Which is why when we come down and want to talk about equality and want to talk about justice, we start by talking about issues of decolonizing. So I definitely agree that it cannot be neoliberalism alone. There's colonialism, there's imperialism, there's capitalism. It's up to you to rank which one comes on top. But Comrade Obe, just to come back to your question, so the question of patriarchy in itself is a really technical question, but when we look at the question of care, I think for me right now is to say, I think in your concept you really highlighted that you were really making it distinct to say social production and capital production. We are saying what is recognized as of meaningful value by capitalists, and obviously it was a choice to say to not recognize care work as of meaningful values when provided by women and communities, because it didn't benefit capitalism at that time. So when we talk about patriarchy at that level, I think for me that is the starting point, to say who put in the structures, the frameworks that we now use to define, to classify, to strategize, even to create policies around issues of care. When I go back to the conversation I had later on, even what Francis was saying about debt, to say the debt question, who is the person sitting on the table making a decision to borrow, right? And then who is the person that is paying for that debt through maybe their unrecognized effort and unrecognized contribution through the care economy. So it's neither here nor there, because really it is a structural issue. But I would say that because patriarchy is really supported by all these isms, like capitalism, it has coined this whole formula, GDP, that doesn't recognize unpaid care work. So it's a patriarchal issue. When we even look at imperialism, when we look at colonialism, like you rightfully said, I like that you said that the woman was the first person to be conquered, the person that came without a voice, without a vote, being counted as children. You needed a man to be there for you to make deals and conversations and things like that. So it's a technical issue really for me, like, to break it down through this meeting. But I'm glad that you, comrades, you have a basic understanding of what it looks like. But in terms of disintegrating this animal called patriarchy, I think the basic issues is to look at our frameworks, capitalist frameworks, when to say that, for example, GDP formula, how do we, for me as an activist, I'll just tell you, just recognize unpaid care work, right? For me, that's it. When you recognize it, you have given value to the women that are giving it, but they don't want to, because that's how society is. It's patriarchal. It's patriarchal. And even also, sorry, Obed, are you trying to jump in?
No, I'm not jumping in.
Okay. I'm hearing as someone is trying to interject, and I continue to talk. So
No.
I would really say that where women are, it's a compounding space, that has been fed into by all the things that we're talking about, all these isms. When you talk about colonialism, you talk about imperialism, even racism. So for us, everything that ends with a ism, for us, that is feeding into patriarchy, including religion. And when we even talk about issues of care, you guys, I'm sure you understand how religion works, Christianity and everything. When you go to the church, these sections, who is responsible when we're talking about prayers for the sick, when we're talking about the priest coming to pray for those that are almost dying, who is spearheading these issues? And we are still saying we don't want to recognize that person. So for me, I think if we want to disintegrate, to break these compounding effects of patriarchy, for me the first thing is to recognize recognize unpaid care work, because it is feeding into the same capitalist economy. The person that is coming to provide labor in capital, who raised them, who nurtured them, who was nursing them, who breastfed them, who gave birth to them, are you saying you cannot give a value to that person and to the work and contribution that they have done to capital? So it goes back to that question, Obed, when you were saying, so when we're talking about social reproduction and saying, how do we help, for example, capital to recognize it? And for me, recognition is the first step, really. If we recognize that, then when you recognize it, then it becomes a part of so what we use to measure our economic development and things like that. When we recognize it, then we can reward it and we can pay for it. So yeah, I think I'll say that in a few in a few words for now, because the word patriarchy in itself, breaking it down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
So,
think
but I think I'll just end here, and then we can proceed by way of a follow up if there is really an area that you want me to really speak to, because patriarchy is complex in itself. But I hope you get the sense here.
yeah, no, it's clear, and I really appreciate the input that you put there, which was very clear. And now, Comrade Francis, I'll come back to you, Margaret, later on that. But Comrade Francis, still on this contradiction on social reproduction and capitalist production, given the context of maybe a global context, to say how are we trying? How can that be reconciled? You understand, Marx at some point when they were speaking of labor replenishing it. They never went back as far as the social reproduction, the process of getting, but it's just about replenishing the labor of those who are already in the workforce. So I wanted to get an appreciation from you, from where you sit, to say how do we try to reconcile these contradictions, where we find some women are choosing even not to give babies because they will not be accepted in the labor market, because the capitalist production will not maybe allow you to go on maternity leave. They will
Yes.
choose to employ people who are not going to go to maternity leave. I'm just picking an example.
Yeah.
To say, of course, Margaret did also come in and say how we might reconcile that, so that we maintain the social reproduction, but also until we have a revolution, also sustain the capitalist production.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think
Mhm.
Margaret had started going into it already. So, the thing about capitalism is that it relies on subsidizing the cost of reproduction, right?
Yeah.
Because and then there's actually two things here. If you look at social care, for example, the reason why you need migrant social carers in the UK is because then you can then provide the care at a subsidized cost, and the person who is actually paying for that cost is us, the migrant care workers, right? Because if you come to the UK and you have the worst conditions, you're not allowed to join a trade union, you don't complain about anything, it means the care can be provided at rock bottom price. The only reason why British people are not doing it is not because it's not they don't want to be carers or something. It's because the wage is unacceptable. The current wage that care is providing, that is being offered for you to provide social care, is so low that a native British person will never, or at least most British
Mm.
people will not accept it. Now,
Mhm.
because we can accept it, so we are now actually subsidizing the social care and
Mhm.
allowing it to be provided at that. And in that way, the cost of reproducing society is now, gone lower. And throughout its history, capitalism has always done this. There are two ways of accumulating. Either you have new markets, new technology, or you can just make sure that the cost of subsistence is reduced. So things that the working class needs, like minimum, calories that you needed to go to work, increasingly, they are reducing, or you get cheap food from the colonies, or you get the very bare minimum to keep you alive. And you're right. This is now starting to cause a crisis even in the center of in the imperialist centers. You find that for most countries in Western Europe, they are struggling with a low birth rate because people now, the cost of reproducing a family is now very high. So people just decide,
Yeah.
look, if bringing a child to this world is going to cost me so much, I'm not even allowed to work. If you're a woman, there are no opportunities for promotion, then maybe just don't do it. But that can only go as far as, a few more years down the line, the whole society, you don't have actual bodies, right? And obviously, because capitalism, the source of all value is labor power. It's nothing else. It's human
Yeah.
labor. That's the
Yeah.
source of all value. And if that's not taken into account, then it causes all sorts of problems during the colonial era and actually even post-colonial period. That's why we have rural areas and urban areas. The rural areas are playing a pivotal role in the process of accumulation in developing countries.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have been wasted in Harare, worked for several years, you're just shunted to your rural home where your grandmother will take care of you in your last days. That just means you don't have a pension, or you are never
Mm-hmm.
paid a pension. That calculation is never taken into account. But if
Mm-hmm.
you were to provide that person with pension, the cost of labor would skyrocket, and it becomes
Mm-hmm.
unprofitable to produce to reproduce capital in those areas. So these are the contradictions, Comrade Obed. I hope I've done some justice. But yeah, it's thinking about those things and just unless, and I'll just quickly weigh in and say, unless we radically change our society, and some of the ideas are there. Interesting. I was reading our economic blueprints when we got independence in 1980. Just read some of the first few years ones. The ideas were there. There's just nothing. Maybe we just need
Perfect.
to tweak a few things about how you
Mm-hmm.
reorganize society. This idea of, oh, we all need to make money now, which started in the 90s, completely ignores all the people that are doing important work in our society. And I don't think anyone believes that your grandmother who is taking care of your elderly brother shouldn't be rewarded for that.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, as we almost come to conclude this program, we are looking at the issue, Comrade Margaret, where um, I think we cannot trust the state to deal with some of these issues, particularly the way we're characterizing our own state and even states global. I'm looking at the context of women, maybe in the Rojava, in the northern Syria, who are women who just organize themselves, organize community, some collective solidarities, and trying to deal with the crisis of the day. And also, you are trying to mobilize in the area of economic justice for women. Do you think these radical ideas of focusing on democratizing to the extent of building power from the society without really looking up to the state is an area that you can be explored to try to accelerate the not to use the such terms as empowerment, but really the process of a positioning women in their right position in society, not under some structures of hierarchy. I don't know if the question is clear for everyone.
I'll try to to answer it from my understanding. I'll do like Francis. I'll answer my own question, but I do get you there, comrade. I will highlight later some of the things that really got me concerned when I was listening to what Comrade Francis was also saying, even in terms of capitalization of care. That maybe a carer, a Zimbabwean carer in UK, cannot even afford care services, even if they are providing them. It's something that I was also really thinking about. But when we talk about community organizing and the hope for change, that is maybe rooted in the community, if I got you correct there. I will say that I think for us that's the work that we are doing, radically trying to shift that. But of course, in this current context, we have to talk about there's an anti-rights movement, there's an anti-women's rights movement. So I would reach out to you guys, Comrade Obed and Comrade Francis, to say, if you were on our team,
I think we can do a much better job, because in terms of how you defined and set the context around how women are being burdened by the care frameworks that are here now, if every other person that we spoke to would view it that way, I think it would be much easier, because in the communities that you get, you find that there are some people, due to the same patriarchy that we talked about earlier on, that are still really resisting the idea that women can have rights, can have equal rights, can begin to voice out, especially in the rural and marginalized communities. However, I would say that if we continue to push, because for us, in terms of strategy, we are building their voice and their agency through their stories. So our work is pretty much what can I say? It's pretty much centered around their stories, their experiences, the evidence that is there, and we'll continue to push. But the resistance is there, and I think if everyone puts their hands on the deck, we could do it. We need to change our attitudes. We need to change the way we view women, as maybe even as part of our culture, because people use words like culture and religion to oppress women, and because women are vulnerable, they love God, they love religion, and they become, they are willing to compromise. So if everyone put their hands on the deck, then radically, definitely we can do it. Of course, the systems are not easy to change, policies are not easy to change, frameworks, and all these systems that were set decades and decades of years ago are not easy to disrupt. But we just have to keep going, keep pushing their voice, and keep fighting that their voice set the agenda that can transform their lives.
Okay, great. We just have to keep fighting. I'll come back to you for your parting shots. Comrade Garikai, the national budget for Zimbabwe is coming through. They're going to be reviewing it. The midterm is coming. Already there are celebrations currently going on. People are celebrating the metric called the GDP as a measure of progress. And I just thought I would put that to you to say, given the crisis that we have been discussing, where our people are being forced to be migrant workers across the globe, what's your attitude towards this celebrated growth where the numbers have grown? And what would be your advice to the Zimbabwean government with regards to how do we restructure the economy in a few words to try to deal with the crisis that we are dealing with at the moment, where there is joblessness among other issues? But then you can also give your parting shots and open check to answer those questions that I stopped you from answering.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, but well, firstly, I don't think the government of Zimbabwe will listen to me, because obviously I'm not very important. I mean, I think Margaret has already talked about the inadequacy of GDP. Several research papers have been written about it, and I don't think we must be thinking it's an easy way of, I think, just simply obfuscating facts, right? Confusing people by continuously saying, oh, our GDP increased by 70%, and yet the well-being of the citizenry is just kind of continues to plummet.
Yeah.
So I think we need another measure, and that measure must of necessity come from a completely new reorganization of our society. The ideas of the late 70s to the early 80s must be kind of resuscitated. There's been a tendency, within Zimbabwean society of completely trashing everything that was socialist in our economic planning, in our economic thinking. And then I think once you go to ASAP, I think there was like the final nail on the coffin to completely eradicate any reference to socialist transformation in the economy of Zimbabwe. Because the ideas were there initially. They said, look, if under colonialism we had all of this very exploitative system, maybe we need to start thinking about developing our economy along socialist lines. I think what should be happening is, one of the other major crisis that's happened, I think, globally, is the idea that the Ministry of Finance is the most important sector in any economy. I think that's very damaging. We should be having, I think, at least for economies like Zimbabwe, the Ministry of Industry, industrialization, a radical industrialization policy that actually starts to advocate for economic transformation. We can't continue in Zimbabwe to be like importers of tobacco and importers of raw gold. We need to be involved in higher value chain activities. And then to speak to what Margaret was saying, this is what actually then starts to bring new ideas. The idea of women emancipation is not just an idea that I say, for example, as Francis must upheld, or you as Orbit or Margaret. It can only come because material conditions on the ground, how we reproduce things, that's
Mm-hmm.
how what changes our attitude. These things reinforce each other, and if the economy doesn't change, it is very difficult for our ideas to change as well. So I think
Mm-hmm.
the way I would see it in a nutshell is I've been reading Kwame Nkrumah recently, and I think his ideas are still something that is worth aspiring for. Right? First, we need
Mm-hmm.
African unity. Second, we need strict massive industrialization. We need to start thinking about debt and how we don't repay that debt. In the case of Zimbabwe, I know for a fact when I was doing
Yeah.
some studies that most of it dates back from the colonial era. Why are we repaying that? I don't understand why we need to repay
Yeah.
debt from the colonial era. We should just say no. If there's enough unity, uh, you know, let's all say we don't want to pay this debt, because that's another way of chaining us. I mean, until we
Yeah.
can, there are two ways of doing it, right? During colonialism, someone would have been whipping you to work, but debt is another, really, it's a chain that you are tied to. You continue repaying for it, and then, you prioritize other things instead of, developing your economy. Now you are prioritizing on repaying debt.
Mm-hmm.
What can be done about that, so that we don't burden the weakest in our societies? We need these things to become the mainstream, really. And the mainstream can only come from another idea of how our society is organized. It can still be
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, oh, we still need to be on a capitalist basis. Some form of socialist transformation needs to start to happen now. And I'm glad that, people are starting to think about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Comrade Francis. Comrade Margaret, your parting shots as we close this particular program and open check this one.
Okay.
Just say
Yeah.
your stuff without me interrupting.
Okay. Thank you very much, Comrade Obit, and thank you so much, Francis. I think my parting shot, I'll start by acknowledging the immigrant care workers, Zimbabwean immigrant care workers. They contribute, I think, 2024 2.2 billion USD towards our GDP here in Zimbabwe, and I think we need to I salute them. I salute them now that I understand even the conditions and context that they operate under, and even understanding that they cannot even afford their own care when they are in foreign countries, and even sometimes provide care for their families back at home. So I think there was need for me to recognize and acknowledge them, and to say that we stand we stand in solidarity with them. It doesn't look like it's an easy task. Then to come back to the issues of the debt question, and maybe perhaps the GDP question, I think, as Francis was trying to respond to it, I also make it my parting shot to say that I think we need to start asking critical questions on whether the frameworks that we are using to measure economic growth and economic development are actually really practical and are relevant in that time. What do I mean? When we have been reporting economic growth, perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years, I remember even during COVID that we had to reduce our economic growth expectation from 7 perhaps to 4, which means there was some element of economic growth even during the COVID crisis. And I think we need to question the relevance of the trickle down effect, as an approach to measuring economic growth, and to say that has an ordinary citizen experienced anything different, any change in terms of perhaps their livelihoods, perhaps their daily income? Are these frameworks working? And the moment we start asking these key questions, I think it's going to be easier for us to come up with practical practical strategies based on the answers. It has not
No one can tell you at the bottom of the pyramid to say, yeah, the economy is growing. We continue to suffer. As for me, I continue to experience suffering, difficulty, heavy-heartedness, and I feel like it's getting worse. So when you tell me about economic growth, what structures, frameworks, and models are we using? Are they working? When we start asking those questions and trying to get answers to them, I think then we have more of practical solutions. And also maybe just to come back to the issue of the contribution of immigrant care workers that are contributing that much, 2.2 billion. What have we given back as a country to these people based on their contribution? Have we given them any subsidy to anything they are bringing in the country, anything to acknowledge their contribution? So I think it's also an important question in terms of rewarding our own people for the effort they are putting in other people, but also for what they are bringing back home for the economic growth of our own people. So yeah, I think these will be my parting shots. I have more to say, but I think I will reach out directly to Comrade Obed and then to Comrade Francis, because I see a lot of synergies in terms of the work that we are doing. Otherwise, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming through. Indeed, the GDP is a fake metric. Kennedy once said the gross national product counts air pollution and cigarettes advertising and ambulances to clear our highways. For Kennedy, it counts special locks of our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of redwood and the loss of our natural wonder and chaotic sprawl. So it counts everything that really doesn't matter. And most of it really excludes things that really matter, like the things that improve the quality of our lives. And we can't be sitting to celebrate that. This was a great discussion. I really enjoyed the insights from both of you, Comrade Margaret and Comrade Francis. Thank you for coming to the platform. And thank you to our viewers for following this particular conversation. We want to hear from you. Send your messages to us so that we can be able to gather your own views and we can then incorporate them in our future conversations. The objective is to continue to try to build collective solidarities among our people in the hope that solidarities can help to bring individual happiness to individual citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Mai, ni mwatinga miri wenika, ni kuchema.